Hi, I'm Margaret, and I need to tell you about the night my 32-year-old son stood up at his promotion dinner and declared his complete financial independence from our family, while I was secretly paying his mortgage, his car payments, and even his grocery bills. The words that came out of his mouth that evening didn't just embarrass me, his champagne glass high. Everything I have, I've earned myself. What made those words so devastating wasn't just their blatant dishonesty. It was the fact that earlier that very day, I had transferred $3,000 into his account to cover his monthly expenses, just like I had been doing for the past 18 months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 57 years old. I live in a comfortable suburb outside of Portland, Oregon, in a house that my late husband David and I bought 23 years ago. David was a software engineer who worked for Intel for most of his career, and when he passed away from cancer 2 years ago, he left me well provided for with life insurance, our substantial savings, and investments that we had carefully built over our 28-year marriage. I had also inherited a significant amount from my parents' estate the year before David died, which meant I was in the fortunate position of not having to worry about money during my grief. My son Trevor is my only child, and for most of his life, he's been the center of my world. After David died, Trevor became even more important to me. He was my connection to the family we had built together, my link to the future, and honestly, my reason for getting up most mornings. Trevor graduated from Oregon State with a business degree 4 years ago and landed a job at a marketing firm in downtown Portland. He's always been ambitious, always talking about his career goals and his plans for financial success. When he got his own apartment after college, I was so proud of his independence and determination to make it on his own. But independence, as I learned, can be more complicated than it appears on the surface. About 18 months ago, Trevor started having what he called temporary cash flow issues. His rent had gone up, his student loan payments were higher than expected, and his entry-level salary wasn't quite covering all his expenses. When he first asked me for help, it was presented as a short-term loan. Just a few $100s to help him through a rough patch until his next performance review and hopefully a raise. Of course I said yes. He was my son. He was working hard, and it seemed like a small thing to help him bridge the gap. David and I had always believed in supporting Trevor while also teaching him responsibility, and this felt like the right balance. I transferred $500 to his account and told him there was no rush to pay it back. That first request turned into a second, then a third. The amounts got larger, and the time frame for repayment became vaguer. Within 6 months, I was regularly transferring money to Trevor's account. Sometimes for rent, sometimes for his car payment, sometimes for what he called unexpected expenses. He always framed these requests carefully, always with explanations about temporary setbacks or delayed bonuses or higher than expected costs. The pattern became routine. Every month, usually around the 20th, Trevor would call me with a story about needing help with some expense. He'd sound stressed and apologetic, always promising that this would be the last time, always explaining how his financial situation was about to improve. And every month, I would transfer the money without hesitation because I couldn't bear the thought of my son struggling when I had the means to help him. What started as occasional assistance evolved into something much more substantial. I wasn't just helping with emergencies anymore. I was essentially subsidizing Trevor's entire lifestyle. His mortgage payment, his car loan, his credit card bills, even his grocery expenses were being covered by monthly transfers that had grown to nearly $3,000. In 18 months, I had given Trevor over $40,000, and none of it had ever been repaid. But Trevor never acknowledged this reality. In his mind, or at least in how he presented things, he was a successful young professional who was making it on his own merit. He posted on social media about his career achievements, his new apartment upgrades, his weekend trips with friends. He talked constantly about his financial goals and his investment strategies. To anyone looking at his life from the outside, Trevor appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a self-sufficient adult who had successfully transitioned from college to career without relying on family support. I enabled this narrative. When Trevor's friends would come over and compliment his beautiful apartment or his new furniture, I never mentioned that I had helped pay for any of it.
When family members praised Trevor's independence and financial responsibility, I smiled and nodded instead of correcting their assumptions. I told myself I was protecting Trevor's pride and allowing him to maintain his dignity while he got established in his career. Looking back, I realized I was also protecting myself. Being able to help Trevor financially made me feel needed and important during a time when I was struggling with loneliness after David's death. Supporting my son gave me a sense of purpose and connection that I desperately needed. I was afraid that if I stopped helping him, I might lose the closeness we had developed since his father died. The arrangement worked, in a dysfunctional way, because we both got something we needed from it.
Trevor got financial security and the ability to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. I got to feel like an essential part of his life and success. Neither of us talked honestly about what was really happening or what it meant for our relationship. 3 weeks ago, Trevor called me with exciting news. He had been promoted to senior marketing coordinator at his firm, with a significant salary increase and new responsibilities. He was thrilled, and I was genuinely happy for him. He had worked hard for this promotion, and regardless of our financial arrangement, he had earned this advancement through his own efforts and abilities. Trevor wanted to celebrate this milestone with a dinner party at an upscale restaurant downtown. He planned to invite his colleagues, his friends, and a few family members to mark this important step in his career. When he told me about the dinner, he seemed more excited than I had seen him since David's funeral. This promotion represented everything he had been working toward, and he wanted to share his success with the people who mattered to him. I was touched that he wanted me there. Since David died, I had felt somewhat disconnected from Trevor's professional life. He lived his own life during the week, and we usually only saw each other for Sunday dinners or family occasions. Being included in this celebration felt like recognition of my importance in his life, and I looked forward to seeing him receive the acknowledgement he deserved. The restaurant Trevor chose was elegant and expensive, the kind of place that required reservations weeks in advance. He had reserved a private dining room for 20 guests and planned a multi-course meal with wine pairings. When I asked him about the cost, he assured me that his new salary increase made this kind of celebration affordable. He seemed confident and excited about his ability to host such an event, and I didn't want to dampen his enthusiasm by questioning the expense. The day of the dinner party, I spent extra time getting ready. I wore a navy blue dress that David had always loved and the pearl necklace he had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look appropriate for such an important occasion, and I wanted Trevor to be proud to have me there as his mother. I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as I drove downtown to the restaurant. The private dining room was beautifully decorated with fresh flowers and elegant table settings. Trevor had clearly put thought into every detail, from the menu selection to the seating arrangement. His colleagues from the marketing firm were there, along with several of his college friends and a few family members from David's side. Everyone seemed impressed by the venue and the sophisticated atmosphere Trevor had created. During the cocktail hour, I mingled with the other guests and listened to people talk about Trevor's accomplishments and potential. His supervisor spoke highly of his creativity and work ethic. His friends shared stories about his ambition and determination. I felt proud listening to these conversations, proud of the man Trevor had become and the respect he had earned from his peers. But I also felt a strange disconnect as I listened to people praise Trevor's independence and self-sufficiency. Multiple guests commented on how impressive it was that he had achieved so much on his own, without relying on family connections or financial support. They admired his ability to build a successful career and maintain such a nice lifestyle while being completely self-reliant. I smiled and nodded during these conversations, but inside, I felt increasingly uncomfortable. These people were praising Trevor for something that wasn't entirely true, and I was complicit in maintaining that false impression. Every compliment about his independence reminded me of the monthly transfers I made to his account, the bills I helped him pay, the financial safety net I provided that made his apparent success possible. When we sat down for dinner, Trevor was seated at the head of the table, with me to his right and his supervisor to his left. The conversation flowed easily, covering topics from work projects to travel plans to investment strategies. Trevor was animated and confident, clearly enjoying being the center of attention and the focus of celebration. About halfway through the main course, Trevor's supervisor made a comment about how refreshing it was to see a young professional who had managed to avoid the trap of relying on family money to get established. She mentioned how many of her younger employees seemed to have ongoing financial support from their parents, and she praised Trevor for taking a different approach. Trevor responded enthusiastically to this comment, launching into what sounded like a prepared speech about financial independence and personal responsibility. He talked about the importance of making your own way in the world and the satisfaction that comes from earning everything you have. He mentioned how proud he was to have achieved his success without depending on anyone else's money or connections. As I listened to Trevor speak, I felt my stomach begin to knot. His words were becoming more emphatic, more definitive. He wasn't just agreeing with his supervisor's observation. He was making bold declarations about his complete financial independence that I knew were simply not true. Then Trevor stood up, and I realized he was about to make a formal toast. The room fell quiet as he raised his wine glass and looked around the table at all the guests who had come to celebrate with him.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
His face was flushed with excitement and wine, and he had the confident smile I remembered from his college graduation. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate this promotion with me, Trevor began, his voice clear and strong. This achievement means so much to me, not just because of the professional recognition, but because it represents something I've been working towards since I graduated from college. He paused and looked directly at me, and for a moment, I thought he might acknowledge my support or express gratitude for the help I had provided. Instead, his next words hit me like a physical blow. "I'm finally free from depending on family money," Trevor announced, his voice filled with pride and satisfaction. "Everything I have, I've earned myself. This apartment, this lifestyle, this success. It's all the result of my own hard work and determination. I've never taken a penny from my parents, and I've built this life completely on my own terms." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. People raised their glasses and toasted Trevor's independence and success. His supervisor beamed with approval, and his friends cheered his achievement. Everyone seemed impressed and inspired by his declaration of self-sufficiency. I sat frozen in my chair, my wine glass halfway to my lips, unable to process what I had just heard. Earlier that very day, at around 2 in the afternoon, I had received a text message from Trevor asking me to transfer $3,000 to his account to cover his monthly expenses. I had made that transfer immediately, without question, just as I had been doing for the past 18 months. Trevor's mortgage payment was due in 3 days, and he didn't have the money to cover it without my help. His car payment had been automatically debited from my account for the past year because he couldn't consistently cover that expense. His credit card bills, his utilities, his groceries, all of these were being subsidized by the monthly transfers I made to support him. Yet here he stood in front of 20 people declaring his complete financial independence and claiming that he had never taken a penny from family money. The disconnect between his words and reality was so stark that I wondered if I was having some kind of breakdown, if I had somehow misunderstood our financial arrangement or misremembered the constant transfers and payments. But I hadn't misunderstood anything. I had the bank statements, the text message history, the detailed records of every transfer I had made. Trevor was lying, boldly and confidently, to a room full of people who believed him and admired him for something that simply wasn't true. As the applause continued around me, I felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't just the dishonesty that hurt, it was the complete erasure of my role in his success. All those months of providing financial support, all those transfers made without hesitation or complaint,
all that assistance that had made his lifestyle and achievement possible had been reduced to nothing in his narrative. Trevor wasn't just failing to acknowledge my help, he was actively denying it. He was claiming that everything he had accomplished was entirely his own work, as if the $40,000 I had given him had never existed, as if the ongoing monthly support that kept his life functioning was just a figment of my imagination. The worst part was realizing that this wasn't a slip of the tongue or an exaggeration for effect. Trevor genuinely seemed to believe what he was saying, or at least he had convinced himself that his version of events was true. He had rewritten our history in his mind, transforming himself from someone who relied heavily on family financial support into someone who had achieved everything through pure self-reliance. I managed to smile and nod appropriately for the rest of the evening, but I felt like I was watching everything from a great distance. The conversation continued around me. People shared more stories and congratulations, and Trevor basked in the praise and admiration of his guests. I went through the motions of being a proud mother celebrating her son's success, but inside, I was reeling from the implications of what I had just witnessed. When the evening finally ended, Trevor hugged me goodbye and thanked me for coming to share his special night. He seemed genuinely happy and grateful for my presence, which made his earlier denial of my financial support even more confusing and painful. How could he express such warmth and appreciation for my emotional support while completely denying the financial assistance that had made his success possible? I drove home in a daze, replaying Trevor's toast over and over in my mind. I kept thinking about the text message he had sent me just hours before the dinner, asking for money to cover his expenses. I thought about all the times he had called me stressed about bills, all the transfers I had made without hesitation, all the ways I had quietly supported his life and career. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my home office surrounded by the same filing cabinets and organizational systems I had used when David and I managed our finances together. I pulled out my bank statements and started going through 18 months of transfers to Trevor's account. The amounts, the frequency, the consistency, all of it painted a very clear picture of ongoing financial dependence, not independence. I added up the total amount I had given Trevor, and the number shocked me even though I had been making these payments regularly. $43,000. In 18 months, I had transferred $43,000 to my son while he maintained the fiction that he was completely financially independent. But the money wasn't really the issue, as much as $43,000 represented. I could afford to help Trevor, and I had given that money willingly out of love and desire to support him during what I thought was a temporary difficult period.
The issue was the lie, the complete denial of reality, the erasure of my contribution to his success. Trevor had stood in front of 20 people and claimed credit for achievements that were only possible because of my ongoing financial support. He had presented himself as a self-made success story while ignoring the family money that made that story possible. And he had done it with such conviction and enthusiasm that I almost wondered if he had somehow forgotten about our arrangement. But of course he hadn't forgotten. The text message requesting $3,000 had been sent just hours before his declaration of independence. Trevor knew exactly where his money was coming from, and he had made a conscious choice to pretend otherwise. As I sat there in my office, surrounded by evidence of the financial support I had been providing, I realized that I had been enabling more than just Trevor's lifestyle. I had been enabling his delusion about his own independence and success. By providing money quietly and without demanding acknowledgement, I had allowed him to maintain a false narrative about his achievements. I had also been enabling my own delusion about our relationship. I had told myself that I was helping Trevor through a temporary rough patch, that my support was building a foundation for his future independence.
But 18 months of increasing dependence suggested that my assistance wasn't leading toward independence at all. It was creating a permanent arrangement where Trevor could live beyond his means while maintaining the illusion of self-sufficiency. The promotion dinner had forced me to confront the reality of what our relationship had become. I wasn't just helping my son through a difficult period, I was subsidizing a lie that allowed him to take credit for success that wasn't entirely his own. And I was complicit in that lie through my silence and continued support. Sitting in my office at 3 a.m, I realized that something fundamental had changed for me that evening. The woman who had written those checks and made those transfers without question was different from the woman who had listened to Trevor deny her existence and contribution. I couldn't go back to pretending that our arrangement was healthy or sustainable. I thought about David and what he would have said about this situation. David had always believed in supporting Trevor while also teaching him responsibility and honesty. He would have been proud of Trevor's promotion and career advancement, but he would have been deeply disappointed by the dishonesty and ingratitude Trevor had displayed. David had worked hard for everything we had, and he had taught Trevor the value of honest work and personal integrity. Watching Trevor claim credit for achievements that were only possible through family financial support would have broken David's heart, just as it had broken mine. I realized that continuing to enable Trevor's financial dependence while he denied that dependence existed wasn't actually helping him. It was preventing him from developing real independence and honesty about his situation. My well-intentioned support had created a dynamic where Trevor could avoid facing the reality of his financial limitations while taking credit for success he hadn't entirely earned. As the sun began to rise, I made a decision that would change everything between Trevor and me. I couldn't continue to fund a lie, and I couldn't continue to enable Trevor's delusion about his own independence. If he wanted to claim that he had achieved everything on his own, then he would have the opportunity to prove that claim was true. I was done being the invisible source of support for someone who denied my existence when it was convenient for his image. I was done providing financial assistance to someone who presented that assistance as non-existent when he wanted to impress his colleagues and friends. Trevor wanted to be independent, and he had declared that independence publicly and emphatically. It was time for his reality to match his rhetoric, regardless of how difficult that transition might be for both of us. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Patricia Williams, who had been managing my investments since David's death. Patricia had worked with David and me for over a decade, and she understood my financial situation better than almost anyone. I needed to talk to someone who could help me see the situation clearly without the emotional confusion that was clouding my judgment. Patricia, I need to review my account activity for the past 18 months, I said when she answered. Specifically, I need to understand the pattern of transfers I've been making to my son's account. Of course, Margaret. Are you concerned about something specific? I just need to see the complete picture of what I've been doing financially. Can we schedule a meeting this week? We met 2 days later in Patricia's downtown office. She had prepared a comprehensive report of all my financial activity, including every transfer I had made to Trevor's account. Seeing 18 months of payments laid out in a professional analysis was somehow more shocking than reviewing my own bank statements. Margaret, Patricia said gently, you've transferred $43,000 to Trevor's account since January of last year. That represents about 6% of your liquid assets. From a pure financial perspective, this level of support isn't threatening your security, but I have to ask about the long-term plan for these transfers. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out, I replied. Trevor has been telling me these are temporary loans to help him get established, but the amounts have been increasing rather than decreasing.
And now I'm discovering that he's presenting himself publicly as completely financially independent? Patricia looked at the report more carefully. The transfers have grown from an average of $1,500 per month to over $3,000 per month in recent months. This suggests increasing dependence rather than movement toward independence. Have you discussed repayment terms or a timeline for ending this support? I felt embarrassed admitting that we had never established any formal agreement. Trevor always presented each request as urgent and temporary, and I always responded immediately because I didn't want him to struggle. We never talked about it as an ongoing arrangement, even though that's clearly what it had become. Patricia nodded understandingly. This is actually very common with adult children. Parents want to help, and the assistance gradually becomes expected rather than appreciated. The concerning element in your situation is the disconnect between the reality of ongoing support and Trevor's public claims of independence. She pulled out a calculator and ran some numbers. At the current rate of transfers, you would be giving Trevor approximately $36,000 per year. Over a 5-year period, that would represent nearly $200,000. Even with your financial resources, that level of ongoing support could impact your long-term security, especially if Trevor never develops true independence. Seeing the projections in black and white was sobering. I had been thinking about each monthly transfer as isolated decision, but Patricia was showing me the cumulative impact of what I was doing. If this pattern continued, I would essentially be funding a significant portion of Trevor's lifestyle indefinitely. But the financial impact wasn't really my primary concern. What bothered me most was the realization that my support was enabling Trevor to avoid confronting his own financial reality. By consistently providing money whenever he needed it, I was preventing him from learning to live within his means or develop the skills necessary for true independence. Patricia asked me about Trevor's actual income and expenses, and as we talked through his situation, it became clear that his lifestyle was simply unsustainable on his salary alone. Even with his recent promotion, Trevor was living as if he earned significantly more than he actually did. My transfers weren't helping him through a temporary rough patch. They were subsidizing a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Margaret, Patricia said carefully, you need to consider what message you're sending to Trevor about financial responsibility. If he can maintain his desired lifestyle, regardless of his actual income, he has no incentive. I left Patricia's office with a copy of the financial analysis and a lot to think about. For the first time, I could see the full scope of what I had been doing and its implications for both Trevor's future and my own financial security. I also had a clearer understanding of how my well-intentioned help was actually preventing Trevor from developing the maturity and responsibility I thought I was supporting. That evening, I decided to do something I had never done before. I looked up Trevor's apartment online to see exactly what I had been helping him afford. The luxury complex where he lived charged $2,800 per month for a one-bedroom apartment with amenities like a gym, pool, and concierge service. The monthly rent alone was more than many people's entire salaries. I also researched average salaries for Trevor's position at similar companies in Portland. Even with his recent promotion, Trevor's income would typically allow for rent of about $1,500 per month if he wanted to maintain a healthy budget. He was living in an apartment that cost nearly double what he could realistically afford on his own. The math was stark and undeniable. Trevor's lifestyle required my ongoing support to be sustainable. Without my monthly transfers, he would need to make significant changes to his living situation, transportation, and spending habits. He couldn't maintain his current apartment, his car payments, or his social activities on his actual salary. This realization led me to understand why Trevor might have genuinely convinced himself that he was financially independent. In his daily life, he went to work, earned a paycheck, and paid his bills. The fact that his mother's money was what made the bill paying possible was an abstract detail that he could easily minimize or ignore. Trevor had created a psychological separation between earning money and spending money that allowed him to take credit for his lifestyle while ignoring its true source. He worked hard at his job, so he felt entitled to the rewards of that work, even when those rewards were only possible through family support. But understanding Trevor's psychology didn't make his behavior more acceptable. At 32 years old, he was old enough to understand basic financial reality. He knew exactly how much money he earned, and he knew exactly how much his lifestyle cost. The fact that he chose to ignore the obvious mathematical impossibility didn't excuse his dishonesty. I spent the next few days thinking about how to address this situation. I considered having a direct conversation with Trevor about my concerns. But I realized that approach would likely result in more promises and explanations that wouldn't change the fundamental dynamic.
Trevor was comfortable with our current arrangement, and he had no motivation to change as long as I continued enabling it. I also considered gradually reducing my support to help Trevor adjust slowly to living within his means. But the promotion dinner had shown me that Trevor wasn't just dependent on my money. He was actively denying that dependence while taking credit for achievements it made possible. A gradual reduction wouldn't address the core issue of his dishonesty and ingratitude. What Trevor had done at the promotion dinner wasn't just about money. It was about integrity, honesty, and respect. He had publicly erased my contribution to his success while accepting praise for independence he hadn't achieved. He had lied to his colleagues, his friends, and even to himself about the source of his accomplishments. I realized that my continued support would be enabling not just financial dependence, but also a fundamental dishonesty that was corrupting Trevor's character and our relationship. As long as I quietly provided money while he publicly denied receiving it, I was complicit in maintaining a lie that served neither of us well. The turning point came when I found myself checking Trevor's social media posts and seeing him share articles about financial independence and personal responsibility. He posted motivational quotes about earning your success and taking control of your financial future. He shared stories about young professionals who had achieved financial goals through hard work and smart choices. Reading these posts, while knowing I had just transferred $3,000 to his account, felt surreal. Trevor was presenting himself online as someone who embodied financial wisdom and independence, while privately relying on his mother to cover his basic living expenses. The disconnect was so extreme that it felt almost delusional. I showed these posts to my sister Linda during one of our weekly phone calls. Linda had always been more direct than me, and she had occasionally expressed concern about the amount of support I was providing to Trevor. When I described the promotion dinner and showed her Trevor's recent social media activity, her response was immediate and clear. "Margaret," she said, "you're not helping Trevor by enabling this fantasy. You're actually hurting him by preventing him from facing reality. And you're hurting yourself by accepting this level of disrespect and dishonesty." Linda reminded me of conversations we had had years earlier about teaching children responsibility and consequences. When Trevor was younger, David and I had been careful to balance support with accountability. We helped him with college expenses, but he had to maintain good grades and contribute through part-time work. We provided guidance and assistance, but we also expected honesty and gratitude. Somehow, in my grief after David's death and my desire to maintain closeness with Trevor, I had abandoned those principles. I had started providing unconditional financial support without requiring accountability, honesty, or even acknowledgement. I had created a dynamic where Trevor could take advantage of my generosity while giving me nothing in return except increasingly elaborate lies. That weekend, I made a decision that felt both scary and liberating. I was going to stop enabling Trevor's financial dependence and dishonesty. I wouldn't make any dramatic announcements or ultimatums, but I would simply stop responding to his requests for money. When he asked for his next monthly transfer, I would say no. I knew this decision would likely create conflict and discomfort. Trevor would be confused and upset when his expected support didn't materialize. He would have to face the reality of his financial situation for the first time in 18 months. He might be angry with me, and our relationship might suffer in the short term. But I also knew that continuing the current pattern was ultimately more harmful to both of us. Trevor needed to develop real independence and financial responsibility, and I needed to reclaim my self-respect and stop enabling dishonesty. The promotion dinner had shown me that our current arrangement was built on a foundation of lies that was corrupting our relationship and preventing Trevor's growth. I called Patricia again to discuss the practical aspects of my decision. I wanted to make sure I understood the implications of stopping support and what Trevor's options would be when he could no longer rely on my transfers. Patricia was supportive of my decision.
"Margaret," she said, "this is actually the most helpful thing you can do for Trevor in the long run. Financial independence isn't just about earning money, it's about learning to live within your means and make responsible choices. You can't learn those skills if someone else is always there to cover the consequences of poor decisions." We discussed what Trevor would likely need to do to manage without my support. He would probably need to find a less expensive apartment, possibly get a roommate, or consider moving to a less expensive area. He might need to sell his car and use public transportation, or find additional income through a second job or freelance work.
These changes would be difficult and uncomfortable for Trevor, but they were the same kinds of adjustments that most young professionals had to make when their lifestyle exceeded their income. The only difference was that Trevor had been shielded from these realities by my support. Patricia also helped me understand that stopping financial support didn't mean ending emotional support or abandoning Trevor entirely. I could still be a loving and involved mother while requiring him to take responsibility for his own financial decisions. In fact, helping him develop independence and integrity would be more valuable than continued financial assistance. I spent the following week preparing mentally and emotionally for the conversation I knew was coming. Trevor typically requested his monthly transfer around the 20th of each month, which was still 2 weeks away. I used that time to strengthen my resolve and prepare for the various ways he might respond to my decision. I also spent time thinking about what I wanted from a relationship with Trevor going forward. I realized that I wanted honesty, mutual respect, and genuine appreciation for the support I provided. I wanted Trevor to acknowledge my contributions rather than denying them. I wanted him to be grateful for help rather than treating it as an entitlement. Most importantly, I wanted Trevor to develop the character and integrity that David and I had tried to instill in him throughout his childhood. The man who stood up at that promotion dinner and lied about his achievements wasn't the son we had raised, and I didn't want to continue enabling the transformation of our generous, honest child into someone who could look me in the eye and deny truths we both knew. During those 2 weeks, I noticed that I felt lighter and more energetic than I had in months. Making the decision to stop enabling Trevor's dishonesty had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I had been complicit in maintaining a lie that made me feel bad about myself and my relationship with my son. Deciding to end that complicity felt like reclaiming my integrity. I also realized that I had been giving Trevor money partly out of fear. Fear that he would struggle, fear that he would be angry with me, fear that he would distance himself from me. But living with the dishonesty and disrespect of our current arrangement had become more painful than any of those potential consequences. The promotion dinner had shown me that my fear-based generosity wasn't actually preserving our relationship or Trevor's well-being. Instead, it was enabling him to become someone I didn't recognize and creating a dynamic based on lies rather than love. On the 19th of the month, Trevor called me with his usual request. His tone was casual and confident, as if he had no doubt that I would provide the money he needed. "Mom," he said, "I need to transfer $3,200 this month. The mortgage went up a little, and I had some unexpected car repairs." For the first time in 18 months, I said no. The silence on the other end of the phone was so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Trevor spoke, and his voice was confused and uncertain. "What do you mean, no? Did something happen with your account?" "Nothing happened with my account, Trevor. I've just decided to stop providing monthly financial support. You're 32 years old with a good job and a recent promotion. It's time for you to manage your finances independently." Trevor's response was immediate and intense. "Mom, you can't be serious. My mortgage payment is due in 3 days. I don't have the money to cover it without your help. You know I don't have the money." "Then you'll need to figure out how to get the money or make arrangements with your lender," I replied. "I'm not going to continue subsidizing a lifestyle you can't afford on your own." The conversation that followed was difficult and painful. Trevor alternated between anger, confusion, and desperate pleading.
He accused me of abandoning him without warning. He reminded me of all the times I had willingly provided support. He questioned whether I had lost my mind or was having some kind of emotional breakdown. But he never once acknowledged the dishonesty that had prompted my decision. He never mentioned the promotion dinner or his public denial of receiving family support. He focused entirely on his immediate financial crisis and my obligation to solve it without any recognition of how his behavior had damaged our relationship.
When Trevor realized that anger and pleading weren't changing my mind, he tried a different approach. He began making promises about repayment and timelines for independence. He assured me that this would truly be the last time he needed help, and that his promotion would allow him to take over all his expenses within a few months. I had heard these promises many times before, and I no longer believed them. More importantly, I realized that Trevor was still thinking about the situation purely in financial terms. He wasn't understanding that my decision was about respect, honesty, and integrity, not just about money. "Trevor," I said finally, "this isn't just about the money. At your promotion dinner, you stood up in front of 20 people and declared that you had achieved everything on your own, that you had never taken a penny from family money. You said this hours after I had transferred $3,000 to your account." There was another long silence. When Trevor spoke again, his voice was defensive and uncomfortable. "I was just talking about being independent in general. I didn't mean that you had never helped me. Everyone knew it was just a speech." "That's not what you said, Trevor. You specifically stated that you had never taken family money and that everything you had was earned entirely through your own efforts. You erased my contribution to your success and took credit for achievements that were only possible because of my ongoing support." Trevor tried to minimize the significance of his words, suggesting that I was overreacting to what he characterized as harmless exaggeration. But I could hear in his voice that he knew exactly what he had done and why it was wrong. He was hoping he could talk his way out of the consequences without having to acknowledge the dishonesty or disrespect he had shown. The conversation ended with Trevor angry and panicked about his immediate financial situation. He hung up after telling me that I was being unreasonable and that he couldn't believe I would abandon him when he needed help. He didn't apologize for his dishonesty, and he didn't acknowledge that his behavior might have influenced my decision. I sat by the phone for a long time after that call, feeling sad but also relieved. I had finally stopped enabling a dynamic that was harmful to both Trevor and me. I had drawn a line that honored my own dignity and hopefully would encourage Trevor to develop the integrity and independence he claimed to already possess. The next few days were difficult. Trevor called repeatedly, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes trying different explanations for why he deserved continued support. He sent text messages describing his financial crisis and the potential consequences of missing his mortgage payment. He even had his girlfriend Sarah call me to advocate on his behalf. But I maintained my position. I offered emotional support and guidance about budgeting and financial planning, but I didn't provide money. I told Trevor that I loved him and wanted him to succeed, but that I could no longer enable financial dependence that he was unwilling to acknowledge honestly. Slowly, Trevor began to understand that I was serious about my decision. The anger and pleading gave way to practical problem-solving as he realized he would need to find other solutions to his financial situation. He spoke with his bank about modifying his mortgage payment, started looking for a less expensive apartment, and began selling possessions he couldn't afford to maintain. These were difficult changes for Trevor, but they were also exactly the kinds of adjustments that led to real financial maturity and independence. For the first time in 18 months, he was confronting the true cost of his lifestyle and making decisions based on his actual income rather than his expectations of family support. 3 weeks after I stopped providing money, Trevor called me with a different tone than I had heard from him in months. "Mom," he said, "I need to talk to you about some things. I think I owe you an apology." When Trevor called asking to meet for coffee, I could hear something different in his voice. The entitled confidence that had characterized our conversations for months was gone, replaced by something quieter and more uncertain. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near his office, neutral territory where we could talk without the emotional weight of being in either of our homes. I arrived first and chose a corner table where we could have privacy.
When Trevor walked in, I was shocked by how different he looked. He seemed thinner, more tired, and there was a humility in his posture that I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. He ordered just black coffee instead of his usual elaborate drink, and I wondered if this small change reflected larger adjustments he was making to his spending. "Mom," Trevor began, after we had settled into our seats, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I realize I owe you a real apology. Not just for the money situation, but for how I treated you and how I talked about our relationship."
I waited quietly, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like a genuine moment of reflection. Trevor looked down at his coffee cup and continued, his voice less steady than usual. "When you stopped helping me financially, I was furious. I felt like you had pulled the rug out from under me without warning, and I couldn't understand why you would do that when you knew I needed the money. I spent weeks being angry and thinking you were being unfair." Trevor paused and met my eyes for the first time since he had sat down. "But then I had to actually look at my budget and figure out how to pay my bills without your help. And when I did that, I realized something I had been avoiding for a long time." "What did you realize?" I asked gently. "That I was living like someone who made twice as much money as I actually do." Trevor's voice was quiet and embarrassed. "When I added up all my expenses and compared them to my salary, even with the promotion, the numbers didn't work. They hadn't been working for a long time, and I had been pretending they did because I knew you would cover the difference." This admission was more honest than anything Trevor had said to me in months, and I felt a flicker of hope that we might be able to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of truth rather than lies. "I also realized something else," Trevor continued. "When I think back to that promotion dinner and what I said about being financially independent, I can see how hurtful and dishonest that must have been for you. You had been supporting me for months, and there I was, taking credit for achievements that were only possible because of your help." Trevor's acknowledgement of his dishonesty felt like a weight lifting from my chest. For weeks, I had wondered if he would ever understand why his words at the dinner had been so devastating. Hearing him recognize the impact of his behavior made me believe that genuine change might be possible. "I need to tell you what's been happening since you stopped helping me," Trevor said, "because I think you should know that your decision was the right one, even though it was really hard." He explained that when he realized I was serious about ending financial support, he had been forced to make immediate changes to avoid defaulting on his mortgage. He had spoken with his lender about restructuring his payment plan, but they had made it clear that his current housing costs were unsustainable on his income. "I moved out of the luxury apartment last week," Trevor said. "I found a smaller place about 20 minutes outside downtown. It's not as nice, and it doesn't have all the amenities I was used to, but the rent is $1,500 less per month." This change alone would make Trevor's budget much more manageable, but I could see in his expression that letting go of the apartment had been emotionally difficult. He had been proud of his upscale living situation, and moving to a more modest place had required him to adjust his self-image as well as his budget. "I also sold my car," Trevor continued. "The payments were way too high for what I actually earn. I bought a used Honda that's reliable but not flashy. Between the lower car payment and insurance, I'm saving about $400 per month." These were exactly the kinds of practical adjustments that most people his age had to make when their lifestyle exceeded their income. Trevor was learning to live within his means for the first time since college, and while the process was uncomfortable, it was teaching him valuable lessons about financial reality. "But the biggest change has been in how I think about money," Trevor said. "When I knew you would cover my expenses, I never really had to consider whether I could afford something. I would buy things and figure out the payment later because I knew the payment would ultimately come from you." This insight showed a level of self-awareness that Trevor hadn't demonstrated before. He was recognizing that my financial support hadn't just covered his bills. It had prevented him from developing the judgment and discipline necessary for financial independence. "Now when I want to buy something, I have to actually look at my budget and decide if it fits," Trevor explained.
It's been frustrating, but it's also been educational. I'm learning things about managing money that I should have learned years ago. I asked Trevor about his work situation and whether his recent promotion had provided the salary increase he had expected. He confirmed that the raise was substantial and would allow him to live comfortably within his means, but only if he maintained the lifestyle adjustments he had been forced to make. The promotion is real and the money is good, Trevor said, but it's not enough to support the lifestyle I was living before. I was spending money like someone who made $120,000 a year when I was actually making $75,000, even after the promotion. This mathematical reality was something Trevor had avoided confronting when I was covering his expenses.
Now that he was responsible for his own bills, he was developing a realistic understanding of what his income could and couldn't support. I want to talk about paying you back, Trevor said, and I could see that this topic was difficult for him. I know I owe you a lot of money, and I know I always said the loans were temporary, even though I kept needing more help. I had been wondering if Trevor would address the issue of repayment, and I was curious to hear how he planned to approach it now that he understood his actual financial situation. I've been calculating what I owe you, and it's more than I realized, Trevor continued. Over $40,000 in 18 months. I can't pay that back quickly, but I want to set up a plan to pay it back over time, even if it takes years. This offer of repayment was important, not because I needed the money, but because it represented Trevor taking responsibility for what had happened between us. For months, he had treated my support as a gift rather than a loan, despite his promises to repay. Now he was acknowledging the debt and proposing to honor it. Trevor, I said carefully, I appreciate you offering to pay me back, and I think it's important for you to take responsibility for the money you received. But I want to be clear that my decision to stop supporting you wasn't primarily about getting paid back. I explained that my main concerns had been his dishonesty about our financial relationship and his lack of gratitude for the support I had provided. The money itself was less important than the respect and honesty that had been missing from our interactions. I understand that now, Trevor replied, and I want you to know that I do appreciate everything you did for me, even though I didn't show it at the time. I took your help for granted, and I treated you like you owed me support, instead of being grateful for the gift you were giving me. This acknowledgement of his ingratitude was another important step toward rebuilding our relationship. Trevor was recognizing that financial support from family should be appreciated rather than expected, and that taking such support for granted had damaged our connection. We talked for another hour about practical matters and future plans. Trevor described his new budget and his goals for financial stability. He asked for advice about saving money and building an emergency fund. These conversations felt different from our previous discussions because they were based on honest assessment of his situation rather than elaborate justifications for needing help. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Trevor brought up the topic that had started this whole crisis. Mom, I need to tell you something about that promotion dinner. I've been thinking about why I said what I did, and I think I understand it better now. I waited for his explanation, curious to hear how he would account for his public denial of my support. I think I was so proud of the promotion and so excited about the recognition that I wanted to take complete credit for my success, Trevor said. I didn't want anyone to think that I had gotten where I was because of family help. I wanted to be seen as someone who had made it entirely on his own merit. This explanation made sense to me, though it didn't excuse his dishonesty. Trevor's desire to be respected for his own achievements was understandable, but his method of achieving that respect through lies had been deeply harmful. But what I said wasn't true, Trevor continued, and saying it was disrespectful to you and to everything you had done to help me succeed. I was taking credit for achievements that were only possible because of your support, and that was wrong. Trevor's recognition of his dishonesty felt like the foundation for a different kind of relationship going forward. He was acknowledging not just the practical problems with our financial arrangement, but the character issues that had made it unsustainable. I told Trevor that I forgave him for his mistakes and that I was proud of the changes he was making. I also made it clear that any future financial assistance would be handled differently, with clear terms and expectations, rather than the informal arrangement that had caused so many problems.
We agreed to meet regularly for coffee to maintain our relationship while he worked on building genuine independence. These meetings would give us opportunities to connect without the tension that had characterized our interactions when money was always part of the conversation. In the weeks that followed our cafe conversation, I watched Trevor adjust to his new financial reality. He moved into his smaller apartment and seemed to adapt well to the change. He started cooking more meals at home instead of eating out frequently. He found free and low-cost activities for entertainment rather than the expensive outings he had enjoyed before. Most importantly, Trevor began talking about his finances honestly. When we spoke on the phone, he would mention his budget constraints matter-of-factly rather than trying to hide his limitations. He asked for advice about financial planning and seemed genuinely interested in developing better money management skills. 3 months after our cafe meeting, Trevor sent me his first repayment check for $200, along with a note explaining his repayment plan. He proposed to pay back the money he owed me over 7 years, which would require monthly payments that fit within his adjusted budget. I was moved by the gesture, not because of the money itself, but because it represented Trevor taking ongoing responsibility for his past mistakes.
The regular payments would serve as a reminder of the lessons he had learned and the importance of living within his means. I also noticed changes in how Trevor talked about his work and his achievements. When he received recognition at work or accomplished something significant, he spoke about it with pride, but without the exaggerated claims of complete self-sufficiency that had characterized his promotion dinner speech. Trevor's social media posts also became more honest and realistic. Instead of sharing articles about financial independence that didn't reflect his actual situation, he posted about the challenges and rewards of learning to manage money responsibly. His online presence became more authentic and less focused on projecting an image of success that wasn't entirely earned. 6 months after I stopped providing financial support, Trevor called me with news that he had been offered another promotion at work. This advancement came with additional responsibilities and a salary increase that would make his financial situation much more comfortable. The most striking thing about this conversation was how differently Trevor discussed his success compared to the previous promotion. He acknowledged that he had worked hard for the advancement, but he also recognized that he had been able to focus on his career partly because I had provided financial stability during his earlier years in the workforce. "Mom," Trevor said, "I know that my career success wouldn't have been possible without the help you gave me when I was getting started. I may have been too proud to admit that before, but I want you to know that I recognize your contribution to where I am now." This acknowledgement meant more to me than any repayment check or apology. Trevor was finally able to appreciate support without feeling diminished by it, and to recognize that accepting help didn't invalidate his own efforts and accomplishments. We planned a quiet celebration dinner for Trevor's promotion, just the two of us at a restaurant near my house. This celebration felt completely different from the elaborate party that had precipitated our crisis months earlier. Instead of speeches about independence and self-made success, we had honest conversations about growth, learning, and the complex relationship between support and achievement. During dinner, Trevor told me about his plans for his increased salary. He wanted to build an emergency fund, increase his retirement contributions, and continue paying back the money he owed me. He also expressed interest in eventually being able to help other family members the way I had helped him, but with better boundaries and clearer expectations. As I listened to Trevor talk about his financial goals and his growing understanding of money management, I felt proud of the man he was becoming. The crisis that had started with his dishonest promotion speech had ultimately led to important growth in his character and judgment. Looking back on this experience, I realized that my decision to stop enabling Trevor's financial dependence had been one of the most important choices I had made as a parent. It had been difficult and painful, but it had forced both of us to confront problems that were damaging our relationship and preventing Trevor's development into a truly independent adult. I also learned something important about the difference between helping and enabling. True help builds capacity and independence, while enabling creates dependence and prevents growth.
My financial support had started as help, but had evolved into enabling. And recognizing that distinction had been crucial for making positive changes. The relationship Trevor and I built after this crisis was stronger and more honest than what we had before. It was based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence, and on appreciation rather than entitlement. Trevor valued my support because he understood its real cost, and I could provide guidance without feeling taken for granted. Most importantly, Trevor developed the financial skills and character traits that would serve him well throughout his adult life. He learned to live within his means, to appreciate help when it was offered, and to be honest about both his achievements and his limitations. A year after our crisis began, Trevor hosted another celebration dinner, this time for his engagement to Sarah. The gathering was smaller and more intimate than his promotion party, and when Trevor spoke about his gratitude for the people who had supported him, he specifically acknowledged my role in his life and success. The young man who stood up to speak that evening was different from the one who had denied receiving family support at his promotion dinner. He was more mature, more honest, and more appreciative of the help he had received. He was also genuinely financially independent, supporting himself through his own income while taking responsibility for his past debts. As I listened to Trevor's engagement speech, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or recognition. I had helped my son become the kind of person my father and I had always hoped he would be. Someone with integrity, gratitude, and the ability to stand on his own while still valuing family connections. The crisis that began with Trevor's dishonest claims about financial independence had ultimately led to his genuine independence and a relationship built on honesty rather than enabling.
Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to say no, even when saying yes would be easier in the short term. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just clip and check them out.